At my graduation party, something happened that I will never forget. What should have been the happiest night of my life turned into the most painful memory I carry. Please stick with me as I tell you my story, and please don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. The house was alive with voices and footsteps. Relatives sat shoulder to shoulder around the dining table, plates piled with food while younger cousins darted through the hallway chasing balloons. The smell of fried snacks, spices, and sweets floated through the room, mixing with the sound of chatter and laughter. Everyone seemed comfortable, cheerful, unaware of the storm waiting to break. For me, it was meant to be a celebration of years of hard work. For once, I wanted to feel seen. I sat at the table quietly, nodding politely when someone turned to me with a smile and said congratulations. Their words felt nice, but they weren't the ones I craved. My heart kept drifting toward my father, who stood near the head of the table, laughing loudly with an uncle. I told myself maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight he would look at me with pride, raise his glass, and say he was proud of his child. That thought alone made me sit taller, hold my breath, and wait. The sound of a spoon tapping against glass cut through the noise. Instantly the room fell quiet. My cousins froze mid-play, the laughter stopped, forks lowered. All eyes turned toward him. My father stood, shoulders square, his glass raised high. The silence was thick with expectation. My chest pounded and my fingers gripped the table's edge. I was ready. This was it. But instead he looked at me with the same cold eyes I had known all my life and said, "You didn't deserve this success, your sister did." The words dropped heavy, slicing through me in front of everyone. I felt the heat rush to my face, my ears filled with the sound of my own heartbeat. Around the table no one moved, a few forced awkward smiles trying to ease the moment, while others avoided my eyes altogether. My aunt cleared her throat nervously. My mother sat frozen, staring at her lap. Then came the look from my sister. She sat across from me, lips curled in a satisfied smirk. It was subtle but sharp, a silent dagger pushed deeper by my father's words. My father took a slow sip from his glass as if nothing unusual had happened. The room still held its breath. My hands trembled under the table, nails digging into my palms, but I stayed silent. I wanted to speak, to shout, to demand why. Instead, I swallowed it all down. That night, in front of family, friends, and neighbors, my father stripped me of the one thing I longed for most, his pride. And in the silence that followed, something inside me began to change. When I look back on my childhood, the signs were always there. My father's voice was warmest when it was directed at my sister. Every small thing she did earned applause. A drawing of crooked flowers was pinned proudly on the fridge, and he would call guests over to admire it as if it belonged in a gallery. I remember standing in the corner holding my own achievement, a science medal I had won at school, waiting for him to notice. When he finally looked, he took it from my hand and placed it in a drawer without a word, shutting it away like it meant nothing. Moments like that stacked up year after year. On birthdays, the difference was impossible to ignore. She would be given wrapped boxes bigger than her arms, toys that lit up or sang, while mine were smaller, chosen without much thought. I smiled and said thank you because that was what I was expected to do, but inside I felt the weight of comparison pressing harder each time. My mother noticed. I could tell by the way her eyes lingered on me when she thought I wasn't watching, or how she tried to slip me an extra piece of cake when no one was looking. But she never challenged him directly. Maybe she was afraid, maybe she thought silence was safer. Whatever her reason, the imbalance was never addressed, and I learned to keep my feelings locked away. Instead of crying about it, I worked harder. I told myself that if I achieved enough, if I pushed further than anyone expected, then maybe one day he would finally see me. I chased grades, entered competitions, collected certificates, each one a desperate attempt to earn a glance of approval. But every effort only seemed to widen the gap. She was always shining in his eyes, and I was always just the shadow standing beside her. Those years taught me a quiet skill: how to endure. I learned to celebrate alone, to clap for myself in silence, to pretend that his indifference didn't matter. But deep down, the hunger for recognition never left. It only grew stronger, a fire that I carried secretly, hoping one day it would burn bright enough for him to notice. That hope was what kept me going, even when everything around me said otherwise. To everyone outside our home, my sister was flawless. Teachers praised her for her intelligence, relatives admired her charm, and neighbors often said how lucky my parents were to have such a bright daughter. She carried herself with confidence, always smiling at the right moments, always knowing what to say to win people over. My father glowed whenever she walked into a room, as if her presence alone proved his success as a parent. But behind that polished image lived another version of her, one only I seemed to notice. She was clever, yes, but not in the way people believed. Her so-called top grades were built on shortcuts. I remember nights when she would call classmates and demand their finished assignments, promising favors or threatening to make their lives miserable if they refused. She collected answers like trophies and turned them in as her own work. Teachers never suspected a thing. Her sweet smile and polite voice shielded her from doubt. At school, she treated weaker kids with cruelty masked as humor. I watched her push one girl into tears by mocking her clothes in front of others. When that same girl tried to complain, my sister denied it with a practiced innocence, even pretending to comfort her. Adults applauded her kindness while the victim stood alone, humiliated and unheard. It was a game my sister played well, switching faces depending on who was watching. Lies came easily to her. If she forgot homework, she spun stories about being sick or helping my mother at home. If she skipped practice, she claimed she was tutoring someone else. Each excuse rolled off her tongue so naturally that no one questioned it. To the world, she remained the golden child, responsible, smart, and kind. To me, she was simply a master of deception. One evening, after another long day of watching her win praise for work that wasn't hers, I decided I couldn't stay silent. I approached my father and tried to explain what I had seen, how she copied, how she bullied, how she lied. I wanted him to understand that the image he admired was not real. But before I could finish, he cut me off with a sharp look and said, "Stop being jealous of your sister." His words stung more than I expected. There was no space for me to argue. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing something important. The truth alone wasn't enough. Words would never change his mind. If I wanted anyone to believe me, I needed more than stories. I needed evidence. Proof he couldn't ignore. Proof that spoke louder than his blind love for her. From that moment, a quiet determination began to take root inside me. The echo of my father's words still hung in the air long after he sat back down. The clinking of forks and glasses had started again, but it wasn't the same sound as before. It was thinner, weaker, filled with unease. I could feel it in the way my relatives whispered in low tones, their eyes darting toward me then quickly away as if afraid to be caught watching. The cheer of the evening had drained out, leaving behind only tension. My own body felt heavy, every heartbeat reminding me of the moment I had been cut down in front of them all. I forced myself to chew the food on my plate, though it tasted like paper. My cousins, who had been noisy and restless earlier, now sat stiffly, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. A few aunts tried to spark small conversations, but the awkwardness wrapped around us like smoke. I kept my head lowered, but I was listening to everything. The hushed voices, the coughs, the nervous shuffling of chairs. All of it pressed against me, feeding the shame that already burned inside. That was when I felt her lean in closer. My sister, always ready to twist the knife deeper, tilted her head toward mine so only I could hear. Her perfume was sweet, almost sickening as she whispered, "You'll never be good enough, you know. This house belongs to me." The smirk on her face was the same one she had worn when my father raised his glass. She didn't have to raise her voice or make a scene. Her words slid under my skin with quiet cruelty. My chest tightened, but this time the sting of humiliation began to change. It shifted into something sharper, colder. I lifted my eyes to meet hers. She expected me to break, to shrink back, but I didn't. I let the silence stretch between us, holding her gaze until the smile on her lips faltered just slightly. Inside me something had shifted. The embarrassment, the shame, the pain. It hardened into resolve. I realized then that if they wanted me to stay small, if they wanted me to accept this role of being lesser, they had chosen the wrong person. I would not shout, I would not cry, I would not beg. I would fight in a way they wouldn't see coming. Not with raised voices but with quiet steps. Not in the open but in the shadows where truth could grow sharp enough to cut. That night at the table where I had been humiliated, a switch flipped inside me. My father's coldness, my sister's smugness. They thought they had won. But what they really did was awaken something I had been holding back for years. The war they wanted had begun and I would not lose. When the noise of the party finally faded from my ears, I found myself remembering something I had almost forgotten. In the back of my mind, hidden like a buried seed, was the thought of a collection I had started years ago. It began as a small act of defiance, something to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining things. Every time my sister got away with a lie, every time I saw her cheat and be rewarded for it, I kept a trace of it. Not because I thought I would ever use it, but because I needed proof for my own sanity. In an old desk pushed against my bedroom wall, inside the bottom drawer there was a tin box secured with a small lock. To anyone else it looked like the kind of place a child might keep coins or letters. But inside were pieces of truth I had carefully gathered. Crumpled worksheets where her handwriting changed midway, revealing she hadn't done the work herself. Printouts of messages she had sent classmates, demanding they hand over assignments in exchange for favors. Scribbled notes where she had promised gifts in return for answers. There were photographs too. Blurry, yes, but enough to show what she tried so hard to hide. One picture captured her handing cash to a boy from another class outside the school gate. It wasn't much, just folded bills, but I knew what it was for. An essay she later submitted as her own masterpiece. Another photo showed her leaning over during a test, eyes fixed not on her paper but on someone else's. I even had recordings. Late nights when walls are thin, I had held my phone close to the door and caught snippets of her bragging to her friends about how easy it was to trick teachers, about how she had everyone fooled. Her laughter in those clips was sharp, confident, dripping with arrogance. No one else had ever heard those sounds, but I kept them, storing each file carefully. For years the box remained untouched. Sometimes I would open it, stare at the contents, then shut it again, unsure of why I bothered. I told myself it didn't matter, that nothing I did could change the way my father adored her. Still, I could never bring myself to throw it away. Something deep down told me it might matter one day. Now, after what had happened at the party, I understood why I had kept it all. Those papers, those photos, those recordings, they weren't just fragments of memory anymore. They were ammunition, proof no amount of charm could erase, no smile could cover, no denial could wash away. The locked drawer that had once been a hiding place had become something far more dangerous. It was no longer just a collection. It was a weapon waiting to be used. It began quietly, almost too softly to be noticed. I didn't confront her, I didn't announce anything to the family. Instead, I let words fall in the right places at the right times. During a casual talk with an aunt, I mentioned how amazing it was that my sister's school project looked identical to one sold online. I said it lightly, like a passing thought, not an accusation. The seed was planted. My aunt tilted her head, curious, though she didn't say much. But I saw the question form in her eyes. At another gathering, while helping serve tea, I remarked to a family friend that my sister had been unusually generous with her allowance before exams. I left it at that, nothing more. The implication hung in the air, and I could see him connect it to the way she always seemed to excel. I never accused, never pushed, just allowed people to wonder. Slowly the doubt began to spread. Relatives who once praised her without hesitation now hesitated, even if only for a second, before offering compliments. Friends who used to call her admirable started exchanging knowing looks when she entered the room. Small murmurs circled, carried from one person to the next. They were too polite to confront her, but suspicion had begun to grow roots. My sister felt it. At first she brushed it off, assuming her charm would carry her through as it always had. But then came the questions, innocent, casual yet pointed. A cousin asked where she bought the supplies for her prize-winning project, adding that it looked familiar. A family friend wanted to know how she managed to balance so many responsibilities at once without slipping. Their words were soft, but her reaction wasn't. She snapped. The calm, sweet mask she wore so easily began to slip at the edges. She answered sharply, her voice raised higher than the question deserved. She accused people of doubting her, of being unfair, of spreading gossip. The more she tried to defend herself, the more she revealed. Her tone was too defensive, her gestures too exaggerated. I stayed silent through it all, watching the cracks form in the golden image she had worn for so long. Each outburst chipped away at the perfection she had carefully built. Her laughter, once effortless, now sounded strained. Her smiles came too late or too quickly, like they were forced into place. The confidence that used to carry her through every room faltered as eyes lingered on her with quiet suspicion. For the first time, people were no longer blinded by her shine. They were beginning to see what I had always known, though not fully yet. She was slipping and she knew it. The mask that had protected her for years was breaking, piece by piece. And I was the one who had placed the first cracks. I waited for the right moment, and it came a few nights later during another family dinner. The table was set the same way as the night of my graduation, the same familiar chairs, the same quiet tension lingering in the air. Everyone had gathered, expecting the usual casual chatter and polite smiles. I poured myself a glass of water, took a deep breath, and let my gaze sweep over the room. This was where it had to happen. I started calmly, almost gently. I placed the first set of papers on the table. essays, assignments, and projects that were clearly not hers. Each one had her name scrawled across the top, but the content was copied, traced back to other students, or even purchased. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply pointed out the inconsistencies, letting the evidence speak for itself. Next, I pulled up screenshots on my phone, messages she had sent and received, conversations where she admitted to bribing others or taking credit for work that wasn't hers. I showed them one by one, letting the words linger on the screen long enough for everyone to read. The room grew quiet, forks paused midair and murmurs died. I could see eyes widen, faces pale, disbelief mixing with shock. She tried to interrupt, voice trembling at first, then rising in desperation. "This isn't true. You're lying," she shouted, trying to drown me out, to rewrite reality with noise. But every time she opened her mouth, I produced the next piece of evidence. Another screenshot, a testimony from a classmate, a photo showing her handing money to someone. Her protests fell flat. Each denial collided with facts she could not erase. My father's face grew red, veins showing on his temples. "This is nonsense," he bellowed, his voice cracking under the weight of what he didn't want to hear. He slammed his hand on the table, shaking it enough that silverware rattled. His eyes darted from me to her, searching for some way to dismiss the truth, but there was nothing left to deny. For the first time in years, my mother spoke. Her voice was low at first, hesitant, but it gained strength as she continued. "No," she said firmly, looking directly at my father. "It's the truth. I've seen it too. I've watched it happen, and I can't stay silent anymore." A hush fell over the room. My sister's face twisted in anger, fear, and disbelief all at once. She sank back into her chair, her confident mask shattered. Guests who had once admired her now looked at her differently, whispers spreading like wildfire. My father stared at the papers, at the screenshots, at the testimonies, as if seeing a stranger in the girl he had always adored. In that moment, the air shifted completely. The table that had once been a stage for my humiliation had become a place of reckoning. Truth had arrived, quiet and undeniable, and for the first time, everyone could see it clearly. The moment the last piece of evidence landed on the table, my sister lost control completely. Her hands slammed against the surface, sending a plate of food tumbling to the floor with a loud crash. The sound echoed through the dining room, cutting through the stunned silence like a whip. She yelled, accusations spilling from her lips, blaming everyone around her for ruining her reputation. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stormed up the stairs, her footsteps hammering on the wooden steps until they faded into the hallway. My father jumped to her defense, his voice booming as he tried to justify her actions. "You don't understand. She's always been a good girl. This is unfair." His gestures were frantic, as if he could shield her from the evidence with sheer force of will. But the relatives around the table weren't fooled. Eyes narrowed, heads shook slowly. Quiet whispers began to ripple through the room, murmurs about favoritism, about how blind he had been, about how long the truth had been ignored. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the tension wash over me. The anger, the fear, the desperate attempts to cling to a false image. All of it passed around the table like a storm cloud. And then I rose. I didn't rush, I didn't shout. I simply walked away, my steps steady, each one carrying the weight of years spent being overlooked and belittled. For the first time, I felt the control that had eluded me for so long. The room seemed smaller behind me, the whispers fading as I moved toward the door. My father remained where he was, glass still clutched in one hand, his other hand pressed to his chest as if trying to steady his racing heart. His mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. The color drained from his face as he realized there was nothing left to say. The proof, the witnesses, the silence, they had cornered him in a way that no argument could fix. I paused at the doorway, casting one last glance over my shoulder. The tension in the room was palpable, the faces of relatives frozen between disbelief and quiet satisfaction. My sister's tantrum had ended in flight, my father's defense had crumbled under the weight of truth, and I was finally free to step out of the chaos. The control that had once seemed impossible now rested in my hands, and I knew for the first time in years that I had claimed it entirely for myself. The days after the dinner passed in a strange quiet. My sister avoided the rooms I entered, her laughter and chatter gone, replaced by a cold distance I had never felt before. Her carefully built image lay in ruins, and while part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, it was nothing like I had imagined. There was no cheering, no praise, no sense of triumph filling the empty spaces. Instead, there was a hollow ache that sat in my chest, reminding me of what had been lost along the way. I glanced at my father's messages, hoping for some sign, some word of acknowledgement, maybe even an apology. None came. The silence from him was heavier than any argument, heavier than any insult he had ever thrown my way. It was as if the confrontation had never happened, as if the evidence and truth had left him speechless, but not reflective. My anger and my careful planning had accomplished the task, yet it did not bridge the distance between us. At home, I passed by my sister's room and caught a glimpse of her retreating from sight whenever I appeared. The same girl who had once dominated every conversation, whose presence had seemed untouchable, now seemed small, careful, and distant. I had stripped away the power she wielded effortlessly, yet her absence brought no joy, only a quiet, lingering emptiness that gnawed at me. I realized then that revenge had not brought healing. It had not restored the warmth or recognition I had sought for so long. The bitterness that had driven me, the plans I had executed with precision, had ended only the battle. The war, the struggle to be acknowledged, the years of overshadowed effort. They were over, yes, but nothing in their place had mended the wound inside me. For a long moment I sat alone in my room, letting the weight of everything sink in. The pedestal my sister had stood upon had crumbled, but the space it left behind was empty, cold, and unwelcoming. The satisfaction I had imagined before the confrontation felt hollow now. What I had gained was not joy but clarity, a clear understanding that the battle could be won without the heart finding peace. And in that stillness I knew one thing: revenge could dismantle illusions, expose lies, and claim temporary control, but it could never fill the void left by years of neglect, favoritism, and unspoken words. It ended the war, yes, but the scars remained, quiet reminders of the price paid for the truth. The decision came quietly, without fanfare, but it carried a weight I could feel in every bone. I knew I could no longer linger in the shadow of a family that measured love by favoritism and ignored honesty. The only way forward was to step out on my own, to carve a life that belonged to me alone. I began sorting through my things, folding clothes, gathering books, and carefully packing the little treasures I had accumulated over the years. Each item tucked away felt like a piece of myself reclaiming space. Securing a new job and a scholarship became the next step, a tangible promise of independence. Applications sent, interviews attended, letters received. Every small confirmation reminded me that I could survive, thrive even without their approval. I felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement, a flutter in my chest that was entirely different from the tension and fear I had carried for so long. The day I was ready to leave, I walked through the family home one last time. The walls held echoes of childhood disappointments, quiet betrayals, and endless comparisons. Every room whispered reminders of moments when I had been overlooked, dismissed, or humiliated. The air smelled faintly of old perfume and cooking, scents that once felt comforting but now only reminded me of the long years I had spent seeking recognition that never came. I paused at the front door, hands resting on the handle. My eyes swept over the house. The familiar rooms, the table where my achievements had been belittled, the staircase where my sister had stormed away in triumph. This place had shaped me, yes, but it had also confined me. It was time to leave it behind. With a deep breath, I stepped outside, feeling the sun on my face and the cool breeze against my skin. I turned once more for a final glance, committing every detail to memory. Then I closed the door behind me, hearing the click of the lock echo like a punctuation mark on the past. The world beyond the door felt vast, open, and unclaimed. I carried no expectations from them now. No need for approval, no hope for acknowledgement. What lay ahead was mine to shape, free from the shadows of favoritism, betrayal, and neglect. Each step I took away from that house was a step toward a life defined by my own choices, my own worth, and my own future. The past remained, etched into memory, but it no longer dictated my path. With the door closed behind me, I moved forward, finally untethered, finally in control of my own story. Do you think I did the right thing by standing up to my sister and leaving my family, or should I have tried to forgive them and stay? I really want to hear what you think, so share your opinion in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single video.